What is HelloFresh? With HelloFresh, you get farm fresh, pre-portioned ingredients and seasonal recipes delivered right to your doorstep. Skip the trips to the grocery store and count on HelloFresh to make home cooking easy, fun, and affordable. That's why it's America's #1 meal kit. Fall is right around the corner, and HelloFresh is there to help you plan for the busy season ahead with tasty dishes delivered right to your door. You just simply choose recipes and pick your delivery date, then lay back and enjoy the last days of summer, knowing that dinner is covered. Parents have enough back-to-school shopping and planning to do. Let HelloFresh get the groceries and save you some cash with pre-portioned meals, again, delivered right to your door. So when life gets busy, don't call for delivery, go with HelloFresh. I've been using HelloFresh for a while now, and I cannot tell you how much simpler making dinner has become. It really does give me one less thing to worry about. So go to HelloFresh.com/50whokilled and use code 50whokilled for 50% off plus free shipping. Again, go to HelloFresh.com/50whokilled and use code 50whokilled for 50% off plus free shipping. Slow Burn Media, an evergreen podcast, presents Who Killed, a podcast that provides a voice for the voiceless.
We get a call out there that there's a credit card in your husband's name, your husband is missing. Tell me what the story is. Because apparently you've been using the credit card for no problem, right?
I always have. My husband is missing, and he is not here generating income. We both he ran the business, and I helped him.
So for 7 years, you have this account.
It has his name on it.
His name on it, and your name.
It says J.M. Orbin.
Okay.
And the debit card, and I just used the debit card. And
for 7 years.
And
Okay.
Am I getting myself in big trouble saying that
I don't see it. If you got it in two people's names, I have one with my daughter's name on it. No, it says J.M. So that means
J. Michael Orbin.
Oh, okay.
It was his account.
I thought it was like J/M.
No, it was his account that he had been using.
And he knew about it, of course. And he was putting the money in.
Yeah, everything.
Okay. You've used this in the past, this credit card, because I saw the Circuit City said you bought stuff with no problem.
I don't know why they are saying they've closed Jay's accounts.
Mm-hmm.
Everything's in Jay's name. Because nothing can be in my name. Because if anything's in my name, the IRS probably
It's going to attach it.
So I put myself at risk, of not being able to accumulate, community property, accumulated status or rights or whatever. And I didn't care because I knew Jay would never, do anything against me or anything. But I guess it showed up that he's deceased. Detective Barnes has been working on this missing persons thing, and I'm really upset with him because he brought us in to tell us the things that they found. My husband. I'm sorry, he's my husband and my wife. And they told his parents that they're pretty sure it's him. His parents are in their 70s and just completely distraught and completely, they're older physically than their age. They're not well. And again, they're just too hell and distraught. And he told them that let's make sure that it's before the DNA. Before the test. I think that's just very irresponsible. His mother's just going to die.
What do you think?
I don't know.
You don't know?
Don't know. At first, I thought he'd just come walking through the door any minute. I don't know. I know I have to tell my son that when he says, did Daddy forget us? That his father forgot about us. I'm not supposed to be talking about this matter. But, I had to tell him, honey, I am sure that something terrible has happened. I don't know that he might have had an accident, or some bad kind when he robbed him, or something bad must have happened. That he would not call you. Whatever I have to face for the mistake that I made of using that card, I will face it.
Well, you know what? The card is. The part about Jay too. I mean, do you know anywhere we can start? Do you have any idea where we can start finding him? for him?
I want him back
What makes you so...
more than anyone in this world. I'm just afraid of something we say being misconstrued or taken out of context or read in a way that it might not be fact. I mean, I have been told, well, you bought this, so you bought this, so you must think that you must have, so that meant that you thought that Jay wasn't coming back. Like, no, that's not what it meant. I bought it, that's what it meant. I bought it, that's all.
When was the last time you saw Jay?
See, this is the thing that I really am terrified of sitting here and answering questions. I want to answer any question that you want answered. I will tell you the truth. I will as best as I know it, I will tell you anything you want to know. But I have a little boy out there that may have lost his father. And I'm terrified of him losing his mother. And I don't want to say anything that may be taken out of context. And I may resume this conversation during the day when I'm in school with the attorney present, just to help me, just not to stop me. I will talk to you, but just to help make sure that I don't make an error. And I don't mean cover my behind and hide a lie. I don't mean protect anyone else. I don't mean that at all. I just mean I have to, given what I have at stake, my life. You know, if I'm blamed for this, I have a little boy out there that needs me. He needs his father too.
Hello and welcome to episode 211 of Who Killed? I'm your host, Bill Huffman, and this is a Slow Burn Media, evergreen podcast, and killer podcast production. On this week's episode, we are going to talk with author Kerrie Droban about an interesting case that she is involved with as a criminal defense attorney. And that is the case of Marjorie Orbin, who was a showgirl who was arrested for the murder of her husband in 2004. Now she's been in jail for 18 years, and Kerrie is fighting for her freedom. So join me for this week's episode of Who Killed? Hello and welcome to a very special episode of Who Killed? I am your host, Bill Huffman, and this week's guest is a author as well as a criminal defense attorney, and her name is Kerrie Droban, and she is here to discuss a couple different topics. And welcome to the show, Kerrie.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
It is a pleasure. I am so glad that we were able to make this happen. And you are kind of a jack of all trades. You've worked in the prosecutor's office. You're a criminal defense attorney. You're an author. I mean, wow. Where do you find the time?
Yeah, I know people ask me that all the time. It's not like the Energizer Bunny. I started, I obviously do them in compartmentalization. It's not all the time, but I started my my law career as a prosecutor, and that's where I kind of got my training. I call it like boot camp, where you do, X number of jury trials a year and you get your feet wet. And I really had the fortunate experience of being able to do some pretty complicated cases right off the bat. And then eventually switched over to the dark side, as it's called, because, I really was missing that ability to have, discretion and be able to talk to clients and really get into more of the meat of what I'm interested in, which is criminal pathology. And so I didn't really get a lot of that as a prosecutor because you're really sort of bound by policies and you don't have a lot of discretion. You kind of have to take cases to trial, and you don't really interact at all with clients. You can interact with victims, but it's a really different sort of scene. And so what I loved about doing defense work is the ability to tell a story and the ability to really, change the narrative. You have a set of facts. Everybody's working with the same set of facts, but as a defense lawyer, you have one theory of the case. So we're deconstructing the case, and the prosecution is constructing the case. So it's kind of an interesting perspective to have both sides of that, and that has been invaluable as an attorney and an author.
That's a very interesting perspective, because I never put that together as far as when you're on the prosecutor's side, where you have minimal interaction with the person that you're actually prosecuting because of lawyers and, all that stuff. So it's super interesting that How long were you in the prosecutor's office?
5 years. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, wow.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very impersonal. That's part of what I didn't like about it. It's an impersonal sort of, just the facts, and so you don't really get to really um, see the person that you're prosecuting as a person. I mean, you see them as this entity that has committed, allegedly committed this heinous crime, and that's sort of what you're given, and that's your role, which is a commendable position to be in as well. But it wasn't something that really interested me because I really think that you know villains are people too, and they're three-dimensional, and so that to me
Sure.
was much more fascinating.
Well, that is very interesting, and I can imagine that personal side would be a drive to get into the defense side of things. I mean, it's just you do get to see a lot more, and you probably do get a lot more experience in dealing with, like you said, criminal pathology and the psychology of these individuals, and just like you said, deconstructing the case opposed to constructing the case. It's just that's so much. I can see how that would be so much more interesting. But again, like you said, it's your boot camp, and you learned a lot, so it's an invaluable lesson, and it's pretty common for people to do that, right? To go from the prosecutor's
Yeah.
office to the
Yeah,
defense
I
side.
think it is. I mean, I think it's actually really valuable for people to do that. I mean, because you get to see many perspectives, and it helps you, I think, be a better lawyer. Um, because it's a tough job on both ends, really. And I think that um, it takes so much energy, so much. I think on the defense side, it takes I call it call it kind of steel. I mean, I think you both have the same job in the sense that you are upholding the Constitution. You're making
Mm-hmm.
sure that the person on trial is getting a fair trial, and that's really the objective of both sides. So it's not really like from a defense perspective, it's not really to get them off or to even to win the case necessarily. It's to make sure that everybody's following the same rules, and people are getting a fair shake at it. And I think that's really the foundation and the heart and soul of our justice system. And so that's what is attractive to me about being a lawyer. But interestingly enough, I had just by sheer luck, when I became a defense lawyer, my very first case right out of the gate was a death penalty case. So I wound up.
Like welcome to the club,
Right.
and
Yeah.
geez.
Welcome to yeah, and that's sort of like the pinnacle of defense work in a lot of respects. I mean, death penalty work is so fascinating, and it ties in so well to the kind of books I write, the cases that I litigate. I mean, it's really the heart and soul of it all, because you're seeing the client as this three-dimensional person. You get to delve into all kinds of mitigation, which usually involves some kind of mental health. There's all kinds of pathology involved in it, and so my whole fascination from the get-go has been, why do people do the things they do? What makes them tick? So sometimes it's a who done it, like who killed so and so, and then you're coming up with what we term in the law as a third party defense. Somebody else did it, right? It wasn't my guy, somebody else did it. And so so that's really
Right.
fascinating and intriguing, because you're doing investigation to try to find out who did it, and sometimes you don't even have enough information, but the whole objective is to at least shed some reasonable doubt. And so so that's part of the intrigue and also part of the challenge. And it's really the same sort of process in writing true crime. It's, I mean, we know who did it, but it's finding the pathology and kind of unearthing that and figuring out how you're going to tell the story. You know, um, so that's part of the fun.
That's very interesting perspective on creating the story, and then finding the people that were involved, and then making sure that you create that reasonable doubt, because we all know how important that is. And with the case that we were going to discuss today, I mean, that's this case Marjorie Orbin, and I hope I said that correctly. But this is a very interesting and intriguing case. Can you tell us a little bit of background about this case, and just a disclaimer, you are representing her as well. So we'll just put that out on the table. But
Perspective.
please let me know. I mean, this is an interesting and intriguing case, and it goes back. It's a case from 2009, and I'll let you go from there.
Yeah. So Marjorie Orbin is a fascinating character. In most of my career, I've really only represented male murderers, and so when Marjorie Orbin came onto my roster, I was fascinated for a number of reasons because I really do believe that she is innocent of the murder. I think that, and just for people that don't know the case, she was a glamorous, beautiful Las Vegas showgirl who was married to the victim, Jay Orbin, and they had sort of a platonic, very, I guess you would call it, a good relationship. But the relationship was that she would marry Jay Orbin and because she really wanted a child. So it wasn't for his money, it wasn't for some other nefarious reason. Her real goal in entering into this relationship was because she wanted a child. And she was having difficulty conceiving, and Jay was going to help her, and he was going to pay for fertility treatments. And, fast forward, she did have a son with him. So that was really sort of the heart and soul of what this relationship was about. And the interesting thing about Marjorie is I think because she's so beautiful, because she was so glamorous and involved in the Las Vegas show world, she's gotten a really bad rap for just being that person. And I think that's a really interesting perspective for a woman and from a woman defending her as well. Because there are a lot of things that are attributed to her that are just not true. For example, she was one of the myths of the case is that she murdered him for the life insurance policy. She wasn't even married to Jay at the time of his murder, so she would not have benefited from any type of life insurance policy from him. Now, what she does admit to is she did a lot of stupid things. And one of the stupid things that she did was she had an affair. And she had an affair with a man that she met at the gym named Larry Weisberg. They had a 3-month tryst, if you will. And, and this is obviously the biggest mistake of her life. And I think a lot of women could relate to her with respect to that because she fell for this man who, by all accounts, really is very narcissistic and very controlling. And, and all of those things are well documented throughout the case. But what happens to Marjorie is she winds up moving a little too quickly in this relationship. And Larry Weisberg, starts to move in to the house that she shares with Jay and with her son. And her son is 8 years old at the time. And Larry sort of convinces her that there's this fantasy, he creates a kind of fantasy where he says, we can really be a family together, right? And so Jay Orbin, whom she continues to have a good platonic relationship with, is a salesman. And he travels a lot. And he travels to, different states selling various artifacts. And so the weekend that this happens, Jay is out on a business trip. Nobody's expecting him to come home. And so Larry Weisberg is home with Marjorie on the night of this murder. And so is her son. And so, as the story goes, there are lots of different theories. This was a case of circumstantial evidence. It's a 71-day, 10-month trial. And the horrible thing about this case, the thing that everybody remembers about it, is the way that Jay died, or the way that he was found, I should say. So the way that he's found is just his torso is found. He's missing his head, he's missing his arms, he's missing his legs. His torso is stuffed into a Rubber-made tub, and it's left in the desert, and it's found by just a random person out in the desert happens to come across this torso.
Terrible. Terrible discovery.
Terrible
Not
discovery.
what you're looking for.
Yeah, horrific discovery. But it becomes a very interesting fact in the case because Marjorie Orbin is this petite, 5-foot woman, maybe 125 pounds wet. And Larry Weisberg is 6 foot plus. And he's a bodybuilder and he's, steroid addicted. He's known for being a rager. I mean, all you have to do is look at the two of them and ask yourself, is it possible? Is it even possible that Marjorie could have done this, number one, on her own, number two, even with help? Because to cut up a body, I mean, it's not easy to cut up a body. Not that, I've researched this. It's not easy to cut up a body. And what was discovered very early on in the case is that Larry Weisberg refused to talk to the police unless he was granted immunity. And so he was granted immunity very early on in exchange for his testimony at trial. Big, big mistake. Because Larry Weisberg, everything points
Seriously.
Yeah, crazy. I mean, there's so many things that went wrong in this case, unfortunately to Marjorie's detriment, because she is now serving life in prison for this murder. And just her. Nobody was tried with her. There was the defense at the time. And I should mention, I represent her on post-conviction. So I was not her trial lawyer. I was not her appellate lawyer. So I'm coming in way after the fact to try to find out if there's any way I can investigate and develop new evidence to reopen her case, to get somebody to look at her, because it just seems like such a travesty that has happened. And it's not, the disclaimer I would make is she's not innocent, but she did not commit this murder, and so that's really the heart and soul of defense work is, they may not be angels, but they didn't do this, they didn't do this thing. So she should not be serving life in prison for this crime.
So I do have a question. So she is convicted the murder takes place in 2009 or 2008?
It takes place in
2004.
Yes.
Okay. And so that she doesn't go on trial until
2009.
So when is she on? Oh gosh. Okay.
Yeah. So she's been
wow. That's a big
years. Yeah.
She was. Oh wow. That is. Just doesn't seem right. Is it common to offer immunity that quickly? I mean, you worked in the prosecutor's office for 5 years. Is that something that you ever came across?
No. As a matter of fact, it was really striking in this case that happened because really all of the evidence points to Larry. I mean, he had, there's just like a laundry list of it. He had and I'll read some of it. I mean, this is what they found, right? So Larry admits that he had saws, hammers, bins, and tape. And he says, he says, physically, I could do this, but morally, I couldn't. Right? So he's already admitting this stuff, but he knows he's not going to be tried for it. He insists on seeing a copy of Marjorie's divorce papers. Why? Maybe to see if there's any type of policy in there. He only speaks to Detective Barnes if Detective Barnes will grant him immunity. And then he sings like a parrot. He has plastic sheeting in the back of his Tahoe, the plastic sheeting that's actually found on the tub. He has a shed in the back of his home and a standalone garage. He kept plastic, duct tape, razor blades, extension cords. He had a dull knife, a throwing knife, a combat-style knife. He owned
Sounds like Dexter.
Right, he's like Dexter. And P.S., the shed was demolished before trial. He demolished this shed with all the evidence in it. So we can't even go and find it.
Wait. He just knocked the whole thing down with all that stuff in it?
Thing down, yes.
What?
Yes.
Red flags galore, guys. I mean, don't drop the ball.
It's insane. And he says he was a hunter. He went elk hunting. He watched an animal get gutted. He actually had a hunting cabin. I mean, the big thing about this case, not to get completely morbid, but where happened to the head? What happened to the head? What happened to the hands? What happened to the feet? I mean, these are all identifying markers, right? So if he has a hunting lodge
Yeah.
somewhere, where's the head? I mean, did it get dissolved in acid? I mean, who knows, right? It was just all ways to keep the identity gone. He owned a futon in his house. The rubber tub was covered with a mattress futon that was similar to Larry's. I mean, this all, it was an extensive list that the prosecution knew, defense knew. He has a son-in-law who was a hunter, who had reciprocating saws. Larry was found with reciprocating saws.
Yep, which is like, for people who don't know, it's like a sawzall, which is basically just a saw that's going to be perfect for exactly what dismembering a body. That's
Cutting
what the
on.
tool you would need.
Larry testified that he could squat 225 pounds, which, I mean, and I should mention, I don't think I mentioned this before, but Jay Orbin was 300 pounds when he died. So,
Okay.
again, how does Marjorie, this petite 125-pound woman, lift the guy, put him in the tub, cut him up, never mind how, whether or not she actually participated in a murder, how does she get him in a tub, right? It's impossible. So there's
Yeah.
all these things that, just that scream to Larry, and he has a son-in-law and a daughter who owned a Jeep Cherokee that had tire tracks that were identical to the tire tracks that were left at the scene of the tub. So, and I should mention, in the case that I had, was I was working on post-conviction, we did DNA. I mean, not all of the DNA was tested, and in the DNA that we had tested, it came back with DNA unidentified to somebody other than Marjorie, who was also a woman. And so the theory that I've tried to advance is that not only did Larry Weisberg do this crime, but he also solicited the help of a man and a woman. So 3 people did this crime. The other fascinating thing about this is, not only did Larry try to move in to Marjorie's house while they were dating, but he also owned a garage door opener. And so,
To their house.
right? Yeah, to their house. So, one of the theories is that, Jay Orbin came home unexpectedly because his son was sick, comes home from his business trip unexpectedly, and confronts Larry, who happens to be there. And Larry wrestles him, shoots him with the gun, and now they've got a problem because now they've got a body in the garage. What do they do about it? Right? So, I mean, there's all kinds of theories out there because it was a circumstantial evidence case, but the verdict in this just doesn't make any sense. And she's been in prison now for 18 years for a crime that there's no way she could have done on her own. There's just a host of things that went wrong in her trial. And so my job on post-conviction is to try to find that new evidence that would open up her case. Because I believe that somebody out there knows the truth. They know what happened. And for whatever reason, they're not coming forward.
And can I ask, I assume Larry's still alive?
He is still alive, yes.
Okay.
Apparently still weightlifting.
All right. How old is Larry now?
He's probably early 70s.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay. The research that I was looking at and some of the articles that I was looking at, it's like they made it seem like it was an open and shut case. Like there wasn't much about it being, a possibility that she wasn't involved. And I know that news stories, of course, they want to dramatize things and make them more, than they are. But in Marjorie's case, the weird things that she did after he died, like spending money on certain things, and she acknowledged that I was, and I you lose a family member, a husband, a lover, it is ex-husband, even, like you're gonna be traumatized. So I don't really put too much stock in that, but it would be I can see the investigators kind of being like, well, this is weird, but
Yeah. No, you're right. I mean, and I think, she would be the first to say she did a lot of stupid things, and she's not innocent of being a participant in some fashion in this case. But as far as murdering Jay Orbin, not a chance. I don't see it. I don't think there's even a possibility of that. But what I do believe, and what I think the narrative would support, is you have a controlling lover who has committed a crime, has a body that he now needs to dispose of, and threatens Marjorie, threatens to implicate her, threatens to take away her child, whatever story he creates to get her to comply, to get her to do the things that she did in this case. And that's a narrative that really has not ever been presented, and it's the narrative of, having a narcissistic, controlling lover suddenly threatening and implicating you in his dirty deeds. And then when he gets immunity and gets off, what a great setup, what a great setup for a person who is a narcissist and controlling. Sure, blame it on blame it on Marjorie, right? So.
And then get away with it. Just talk about empowering them.
Yeah, it's just
Here's a
adding
question.
one layer of abuse, onto this already toxic and abusive relationship. So it is really interesting to look at it from that perspective, which I don't think anybody really does, because they don't, again, the prosecution, you've got this, it's hard to overcome the horror of the crime itself. And that's really what is difficult, even for a jury, right? You go in front of a jury and you say you're not allowed to be influenced by your passions, right? Well, it's really hard when you've got a torso. And so I think in situations like that, I think it is really important from a prosecution perspective to catch the killer, right? To get the killer, to make sure someone pays for this, and to make sure that the child, who at the time was 8 years old, is not orphaned, right? That justice is served, that his father's killer comes to town. So I think a lot of that goes into the prosecution's case, and it goes into the police investigation, where, there have been allegations of a rush to judgment. Why give this guy immunity? You haven't even investigated the case. You don't even know enough about it to give him immunity, and yet it happened. So there's all kinds of missteps, I think, in Marjorie's case. And I would also argue that, because of who she is, she also was sort of condemned from the beginning, because she's this beautiful showgirl, successful, there have been shows that have depicted her as sort of a black widow, going after and using her beauty,
the one I can
lure men in, right?
Yes.
That's like,
Mm-hmm.
You can flip that narrative around too and say that, a beautiful woman like that can also have a lot of insecurities. They can also be somebody who is duped by men, who is flattered by men, particularly men like Larry Weisberg. So that's how you take the same set of facts and change that theory of the case. And so I think in my conversations with Marjorie and my dealings with her, that's the woman that I see. That's the woman that I've come to know, which is somebody who really, I think, was condemned for her beautiful outer layer, right? Without anybody really saying, hey, let's take a closer look at what really happened here. And let's not condemn her for all of the acts. Let's look at what she actually did, which is a cover up, which is, accessory after the fact, perhaps. But it's not murder.
Yes, and I agree with you on that. I mean, it's definitely, from the way that the articles portray this case, is they don't know exactly when this happened. It's a certain time. It's between a certain time frame. I mean, I can totally see the scenario play out exactly how you've laid it out, and yeah, being an accessory, that doesn't and should not entail a life sentence, especially when you're in a circumstance where you're basically under his control. And so what are you going to do when the guy has a gun and just killed your ex-husband and is now saying, well, we need to get rid of the body?
Right.
What are you going to do? I mean, you're not really going to fight him. I mean, how big is Larry? The guy benched 225. I mean, they're not bench. He can squat 225. I don't want to give him too much credit because, that's a whole nother thing. But, yeah, I mean, did he have any connection? That was the question I wanted to ask. Did he have any connection to the local police at all? I mean, that seems like a kind of like a sweetheart deal.
It does seem like a sweetheart deal. It's not really a connection. In fact, it's even weirder than that because he applied to be a police officer and flunked, so he was a rejected wannabe police officer, which makes it even worse that he got this sweetheart deal. I mean, it's just, the whole thing is very, it's not good around this because it really does sort of spotlight the police as well, saying, what kind of investigation did you do? I mean, at one point, the SWAT team shows up to Marjorie's house and Larry's there, and they ask him.
Yeah, right. I read that.
And so, I mean, he's literally like attacked by the cops because he's so aggressive and so in their face. And so, I mean, that kind of rage and that unwillingness to take a polygraph and all of that, I mean, just speaks volumes to, I mean, what are you hiding? What are you hiding? So yeah, I mean, I think there's just a lot that was not unpacked in this case. There was a rush to judgment in this case, I believe, and the real culprit was protected for reasons unknown, and I mean, I still cannot get to the bottom of that immunity agreement. And I'm
Sure.
the conviction lawyer, trying to figure out what happened. And then to boot, Detective Barnes, and he says this in his Dateline interview, but he didn't even testify in her case. So here's the lead detective who takes the fifth in Marjorie Orbin's case and cannot even testify. So, I mean, the whole thing is insane because he's being investigated for something else, something related to something completely different. But he doesn't. So you've got this like crazy set of circumstances that really, I mean, in my opinion, just railroaded her ability to have any type of fair trial. And I'm a pretty, I mean, like I said, my background comes from prosecution and then defense. So I am not a bleeding heart. I am not somebody that just will jump on the bandwagon of any, client I have. I really do look at a case and look at the facts and go through the investigation and try to really dig deep into what happened here. So for me to say that and to have all of this sort of chatter around me that is condemning her, I think really kind of speaks volumes to what went wrong in this case. And the other thing that I think is pretty telling is that Marjorie herself owns up to her part in this. She owns up to the fact that she made stupid mistakes. She did things that, were by all accounts crimes, but they weren't this murder. And so I think that in and of itself also, gives her some credibility and some standing, in this fight.
So being the post-conviction lawyer and trying to, undo and deconstruct this case, what is it that you need to find or discover or uncover that will move the case towards some resolve, where she can be let out of prison and somebody can actually be held accountable for this crime?
Well, it's a difficult road, but it's newly discovered evidence. And in this case, you know, I'm looking for the smoking gun that will implicate Larry. And because Larry has immunity, I need to find the players that helped him. I need to find somebody who will talk. I've already, you know, tested various items that I can test that weren't tested, you know, for DNA previously. Came up with this unknown female DNA that does not match Marjorie's. So whose is it? Whose does it match? There's somebody out there that knows the truth, that knows what happened, that has been silenced, and maybe by Larry. I mean, we've seen what he was capable of with Marjorie. Maybe he did that with relatives of his. I mean, you know, he's even seen by his daughter dumping large garbage bags in a dumpster on the night of this murder. So, I mean, you know, were they parts? I mean, what does his daughter know? You know, I mean, these are the kinds of things that, as a post-conviction lawyer, I go and I investigate. And so I interview people. I try to, you know, re-interview people, ask them new questions. Maybe with passage of time, people are more willing to talk. You know, it's a really, really difficult hurdle to overcome, because you have to find something in the case that was not previously presented and that could not have been previously discovered. So it's a new wrinkle to it, a new angle.
It has to be new evidence to push that ball down the field. That's definitely a challenge. How often do you speak with your client?
You know, I try to communicate with her at least to just say, you know, I'm working on stuff about once a month. You know, and visitations are fewer, but I try to keep the hope alive, because it's really easy to lose hope when you're in prison and so many years have passed and there have been so many, you know, trips down the rabbit hole, and nothing materializes. So it's easy to lose hope. And I think that, you know, the important thing for Marjorie is, you know, it can come at any time. It's never going to be swift. And I think that's the rub of it, you know, investigating, trying to prove a negative or investigating something where you don't even have a lead is really, really tough.
Yeah, I can imagine. And so if, let's say, you know, you find this this new evidence and you uncover some, you know, maybe some DNA profiles that maybe match up, you know, the fact that Larry has immunity, does that, you know, again, that's the reason it has to be newly discovered evidence?
Right. It has to be newly discovered evidence. And I'm hoping that you know, if somebody else comes forward and points the finger at him, or there's something, you know, where they find, you know, the murder weapon, or, you know, whatever it is, if there's like, I mean, now we don't even have a shed because it was demolished, but I mean, there has to be something that's going to point back to him. So it's not just his testimony or his thing, you know, I mean, it made it so tough for even the defense during trial, you know, to implicate him because of his immunity. I mean, it's crazy. It's crazy. I've never had a case where that's happened, where somebody says, you know, here's the lead guy, but we don't need him. We're going to implicate, you know, the secondary player.
It sounds like a plot of a TV show that is impractical. You know, like they're just the crime of the week. You know, a Law and Order episode. Like that doesn't even seem like they would even do something like that.
Nonsense. Yeah, I don't even understand it. I can't even offer an explanation for it. It makes no sense.
That has got to be the most frustrating thing ever. So, do you think it would be his daughter that would most likely be the one that would, I don't know, eventually turn on him? Because, you know,
yeah, I mean,
you mentioned the son-in-law, and because I mean, if there's anybody that needs an immunity deal.
Right,
you know what I'm
exactly.
saying? Like, you know, who's the least responsible? You know, if this is the daughter-in-law or the daughter and the son-in-law, if they're involved and they say, well, we would like immunity because we know the walls are closing in and yada, yada, yada. I mean, is that what you hope is the eventual outcome, where one of them will just say, this is it?
I would hope that somebody has a conscience after so many years. I mean, I just find it impossible to believe that somebody has not talked to somebody, that there's not, pillow talk or something that has happened in private, because, whether or not Larry can ever be prosecuted for this, it is almost a secondary issue, because if somebody comes forward and says, Larry did this, and this is how I know this, then Marjorie is out. So, that's my concern, is what can I do to get Marjorie, what can I do to get justice? Because it's not just for her to be serving a natural life sentence. I mean, she's served 18 years or whatever, even if she was an accessory after the fact, she's done her time, and that's the thing. It's like, let's actually make this a just prosecution. I mean,
Yeah,
it's a tall order, but
sure. It sure is. And, you mentioned she's been in jail for 18 years. So that means that they focused in on her right away, right after the crime. So why did it take them 5 years to go to trial?
well, I mean, it is a complicated case, so they're doing their investigation gathering. So, I mean, she would be incarcerated without bond for that length of time while they investigate. And so that's not necessarily unusual, unfortunately, but it definitely, yeah, it adds to all the factors on that. I mean, if you're picked up on a death penalty case because the state noticed, I mean, you're sitting incarcerated, waiting for your day in court.
You don't even get offered bail.
You don't get a plea offer, or you don't get anything. So it's
That is so ridiculous. I mean, I want to know, what was the time frame between the day that they found the body to the time that they put her in jail?
Well, it was within a month. So it
Jeez.
began as a missing persons case where, I mean,
Okay. Makes
what
sense.
I believe, yeah, right. So, I mean, Jay didn't come home, and then people were trying to figure out what happened to him and why didn't he come home. And Marjorie, I mean, what I believe happened is I think she's under the thumb of Larry. So she's trying to play along and hoping that this becomes a missing person case and will go away. And that's how she's helping him to cover up this horrific crime. But, pretty soon they discover that Jay's vehicle that he was using is abandoned, and then it's moved, and then they find the torso. And so it kind of goes from there. So it goes from missing persons to now it's a homicide, and now we need to find the person. And then, of course, Larry asks for immunity, and then it kind of goes from there. So it was very quick to pin her as
And I want to
suspect.
know what this this Larry character. I mean, anybody named Larry is a character. Just
Right, yeah.
that's just something about it. But how quickly did he? Did they go and ask him, and he's just like, I'm not going to say anything unless I get immunity. I mean, was that his?
Well, pretty much. It was very quick. I mean, it was, he spoke to one detective before Detective Barnes. Well, actually, I think he spoke to a couple before Detective Barnes. And then finally, he says to Detective Barnes, I'm not going to talk unless you grant me immunity. I won't tell you anything unless you grant me immunity. And so, I think it really sort of played into this, this desperate search for who did this horrific crime. So, we'll grant you immunity. And then as the investigation moves along, they start to realize, hey, maybe Larry had a much larger role in this than we initially, realized. But you can't renege on that now.
So that's my big question is, if you're the prosecutor, you've given this guy immunity, and then the case starts to look like, well, this individual seems to be more involved than what he's leading on, because clearly he's, a bigger man that can actually move a body. I mean, I don't think I could move a 300-pound body. Like, that's dead weight is dead weight, and not a pun intended.
Right. So can you reverse immunity? I think is your question, right? Can you reverse it? Well,
I mean, while you're
no.
in the middle of I mean, I guess while you're a prosecutor and you just, yeah, can you just be like, no, I'm sorry, we have to take that back?
No, I mean, you can't. I mean, you've made a deal with this guy, so you can't, I mean, what you can do is you can let the other person out. If you
Well,
start to, this is where I think the state like really fell down. I think that, once the investigation really starts to point to Larry, I think it behooved the state to drop the murder charge on Marjorie. When it
yes.
becomes clear, but they didn't do that, and so and they didn't even charge her as they can't even charge him as a co-defendant or an accomplice. But I think really the problem is that they don't drop the charges on Marjorie, and that's where I think they went south.
Wow. It seems to be a very complicated, narrow focused investigation that really wasn't much of an investigation, because it seems like Larry dictated the whole damn thing. And pardon my French, but it's kind of crazy that it's somebody who was clearly involved. I mean, the guy wouldn't take a polygraph. He's at the house. I mean, he's having an
Right.
affair. I mean, I don't even, in 2022, he'd be in jail. And I
It's
don't
mind-boggling.
understand what happened.
I don't understand what happened either. It's completely mind-boggling to me. I mean, the whole thing is mind. That's why. I mean, that's why I've been on this case for so long, because it just has so many twists and turns to it. Every time I dig into one area, something else comes up, and but it all roads sort of lead to Larry. I mean, he's the one that orchestrated this, and you can imagine from a narcissist perspective, this is great. I mean, the whole case has, he's immune from it. It doesn't matter. The right, in his mind, the right person is, taking the rap. I mean, it's just a brilliant sociopathic setup is what it is. I mean, that's what it appears to be. And, and he's safe from it all.
Yeah. I mean, I know we got to get going here because, you've got a tight schedule, but I just got a couple more questions. And I guess that would revolve around Larry and just like his past. Was there anything in his past that would have dictated that he could have been violent or, a murderer? I mean,
Like the making of a murderer. Well,
yeah,
I mean,
just,
I think, for him, I mean, I think it was opportunity. If it played out the way that I believe that it played out, I think um, it was opportunity, but it was also sort of moving in and wanting to take over, this life that Marjorie had. He wanted the ready-made family. I mean, there's certainly evidence that he was, a rager, passive aggressive, a hunter, was a handyman, had a lot of skill set with knives and guns, and so I mean, there's definitely that background in his past. There's also the strange sort of, how did he flunk, applying to different police departments, and so like there's something in his background that just really kind of screamed red flags. But
mhm.
is he capable of murder? I mean, I don't know. I think under the right circumstances, somebody like that could certainly commit murder. And I think that's what happened in this case. I think that Jay Orbin surprised them, and I think he grabbed Jay's gun because Jay traveled with a gun, and I think they had a tussle in the garage, and I think he shot Jay. And I think that's, he needed to get rid of the body. I mean, but to diabolically say, hey, let's cut him up and put him in a tub, I don't believe that Marjorie had any knowledge of that. And I think the fact that they have her on video shopping at Home Depot for a tub, I don't think that's evidence of anything, because that's what that's what Jay Orbin's business was. They had a lot of tubs in their garage that contained a lot of his artifacts that he sold. So there really isn't a link that way that she's out there. But even if there is she out there buying a tub at Larry's, demand or require? I mean, I really do not believe she had any idea that her ex-husband was going to be chopped up and stuffed into a tub. I mean, nothing that I have read or researched would ever point to that. So I think that, somebody like Larry would be capable of that and that diabolical, particularly if he had a hunting lodge and a chainsaw and, all the equipment that he could have and had seen an animal gutted before, had perhaps gutted one himself, because that's the other thing about the torso,
Sure.
all the organs, I mean, right? I mean, that's
Wait,
like,
say
that's what
wait, say that again. Wait, say that again. Wait, what was this?
well, the torso, when it's found, all the organs are gone. It's disemboweled, right? So that is what a hunter does.
That's exactly what a hunter does. That's why I'm shocked that this is such this.
Right?
This
It's
is
shocking. It's shocking
infuriating.
and crazy. Can you imagine? So Marjorie's basically my size. Can you imagine me, like my size, being able to lift a 300
No.
pound
The answer is
person?
no. Look
It's-
at me. I couldn't do that.
Well, there you go.
So,
It's completely
I'm just
so
I don't even know if the two of us could do it.
right.
I mean,
I
300
know.
pounds is
Yeah. Yeah. See, those
But, man.
details are the things that are just they're mind-boggling. Those details really, for me, sort of nail this case. I mean,
Sure.
hunting lodge, disemboweling a body, gutting them. I mean, all of that.
Yeah, being a hunter and knowing where to cut the tendons and do this and do that, and it definitely is something that would be a red flag for me if I was the investigating team or part of the investigation, and that's definitely something that is very intriguing. And did they use that video of her in trial?
With the Home Depot video? Is that the one
Yes.
you're talking about? Yes, they did.
Yeah.
They presented that. Yeah.
So my question is, Home Depot in 2004 though, wouldn't they be able to determine what she bought exactly?
Yeah, I mean, it looked like, I mean, I think it was just the tub. It was a black tub in a shopping cart, is what the video showed. So,
But they weren't able to trace it back to the body.
no, but they had a receipt that she went to Home Depot. I know, that's what I mean. Like, it's just a Rubbermaid tub,
It's
which she had plenty of Rubbermaid tubs in her garage, so
doesn't
I
make
mean,
sense.
yeah, it doesn't make sense. There's a lot of, it's really a crazy case. I really think that, a lot of it, I mean, two things I think that really probably, swayed the jury or hurt her was, things that had actually nothing to do with the case. It was her background, Larry getting immunity. I mean, she was condemned for being naive, perhaps.
And her lifestyle. Let's just be honest.
Yeah.
I mean, it was the fact that people saw her for what her her persona may have been, and they applied that to this woman, and it was unfairly applied because you've done certain things or you've done certain jobs to earn money doesn't mean that you're a murderer. It just doesn't.
Right.
If that was the case, there'd be millions of people locked up. It just doesn't. It doesn't. I mean,
Right.
there are many more millions of people.
Yeah, I mean, they're prejudging her, or misjudging her for things. They may not approve of her lifestyle. They may not like the fact that she's beautiful and glamorous, and seem to attract men, or was unfairly or unduly flattered, by them, by the attention. I mean, all of those things. They may be, from some people's perspective, character flaws or reasons to condemn somebody, but it's had nothing to do with this case, and and I think unfortunately that legacy has followed her in a lot of this.
And that's just a shame.
She's been a librarian, I mean, it might have been a different outcome, you know?
Absolutely. They wouldn't have zeroed in on the pretty blonde, and it's weird how this country works in that regard. We just discount certain people and certain things, and um, I just feel like
Yes.
this is a case where she got totally tossed to the side, and
Yeah.
you know,
Not especially sympathetic. So
they just threw her out and locked her up for life. Like, what's up with that? I just don't.
it's
It's the
very
old
scary. I
expression,
mean,
just lock up.
right. Yeah. I mean, it's scary because, I mean, this was like literally 3 months of her life meeting Larry. I mean, what a fateful, crazy thing. And how many women, wind up in very destructive, bad relationships. You can almost see that sort of unfold, where she then gets trapped because she doesn't want to harm her child. And, he's threatening her that he's going to do something with her child. It's a very bad situation to be in.
All right, as we wrap it up here, is there anything that you would like our listeners to know that we haven't yet covered, or is there any way that they can lend support, or, how do they find you?
Well, they can find me on my website, so it's kerriedroban.com. If they're interested in, um, you know, the criminal pathology or other, um, just other, my background, for example. I mean, I have a lot of books out there on Amazon under Kerrie Droban, and I spend a
What was your
lot of
latest
time.
book?
My latest book was Aurora. It's the psychiatrist of the Colorado Movie Theater tells her story. So this was the story of James Holmes, who went into a Colorado movie theater and shot up 12 people, wounded 72 others, in what was considered then the worst mass shooting in U.S. history. And sadly, that has been surpassed.
Multiple
We've had like
times.
611 mass shootings in 2022 alone. So it is an epidemic. And
100% agree.
yeah,
And I'm
terrible.
in Colorado now, and I mean, the legacy. People walk around here and they wonder what is with the state? Why are there so many mass shootings here? And nobody knows
I
the
don't,
answer.
I don't get it. I don't get it. I mean, Columbine, Aurora, there have been several
King
after
Soup, the
that.
King Supers in Boulder. Um, I
Wow.
mean, all this stuff. I mean, it's nuts. It's nuts. I mean, my buddy was driving. We were going by a school, going rafting, and he's like, "Yeah, there was a school shooting there," and I was like, "What?" He's like, "Yeah, some
Yeah.
crazy guy shot." And just you know, again, not to. I'm not going on a tangent, but it's just yes, I agree with you. It's definitely an epidemic that needs to be addressed, and it's not being properly addressed. I'll leave it at
Yeah.
that.
It's crazy. But yeah. But
So
if
yeah,
anyone's
check out your
interested,
website. And Kerrie, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join me. And again,
thank
yes, thank
you.
you. Many thanks to author and criminal defense attorney Kerrie Droban for joining this week's episode of Who Killed. It was a pleasure to discuss the case that she is currently working on. And again, you can check out all her stuff at kerriedroban.com. And as far as you guys go, thank you so much for tuning in this week. And I will have a new episode every Friday starting in 2023. And again, this is a labor of love, and I wouldn't be here without you guys. So if you are interested in knowing what's coming down the pike, please follow me on Twitter at BillHuffman3. I know it's currently a cesspool. Thanks a lot, Elon. And other than that, you guys can also support the show via Venmo with my username at Bill-Huffman-3. And other than that, as always, stay healthy, and most importantly, be safe.
Hi, podcast listeners. I'm Carol Costello, a former CNN anchor and national correspondent. This January, I'm launching a podcast about one of the first cases I ever covered as a journalist. It's one that stuck with me all of these years, the one that buried itself under my skin and stayed put. It's a true crime series about an amazing woman named Phyllis Cottle, who defied torture and death and brought a fierce rage to the quest to find her attacker. Carol Costello Presents Blind Rage. It's a production of Evergreen Podcasts and signature title of the Killer Podcast Network. Listen and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Discover more great true crime and paranormal programming at killerpodcast.com.
The crime was so brutal it was compared to the Manson murders. Mary and Bill, an Ohio cold case, explores what it takes to bring new attention to an unsolved double homicide and turns up new hope for answers. Listen to Mary and Bill, an Ohio cold case from IdeaStream Public Media, wherever you get your podcasts.